This is the Modern Business API Edge Caching demonstration. In this demonstration, we're going to show how the innovations of technology around the Sentry API Security Gateway provide for optimized business APIs through intelligent response caching, or as we call it, edge caching, at the edge of the network, at the first line of communication into the infrastructure, and how that can substantially optimize business patterns for modern day traffic information flows. I'm Jason Macy, Chief Technical Officer of Forum Systems. Today in the modern network, the traffic is primarily comprised of standards-based formats that have evolved from the likes of OASIS and W3C and IETF and open standards. And these data formats effectively are structural known data formats that in effect provide the framework of most of today's modern day technologies. And as such, you will probably be more familiar with the picture as it looks here, which is the underlying applications that are effectively part of the modern ecosystem of the internet, cloud, and traditional infrastructures. Where this has effectively evolved is that it provides that standards-based framework whereby API security gateways, such as Forum Sentry, can provide for security and enablement of those business flows, and primarily provide that at what we call the edge. When we say the edge, what we mean is the frontline boundary for where the data transfer occurs. Traditionally, you would call this the DMZ, or the point of entry, where the external facing clients, for example, would be the internet or other environments calling into the infrastructure. But the edge could also be a cloud provider entry point, or a virtualized container entry point, or when you're communicating across security zones. So that edge is really the frontline boundary, the first line of defense, where the API is exposed for communication. Where we look at the edge deployment topology, where we can then show and demonstrate how edge caching can be accomplished, we have to first look at the nature of edge deployments as far as it pertains to API gateway security. And edge deployments are effectively out at the tier, again, of that boundary, that frontline boundary, protecting and enabling the communication to the infrastructure services that comprise modern day communication flows: mobile, portals, REST services, SOAP, XML, FTP, SFTP, ESB services are all part of that paradigm, where the client technologies and the communication points that are consuming those services are things like mobile apps and users and portals and B2B infrastructure, cloud, third party, are all different calling clients that are consuming those services. And ultimately within that, there's a substantial richness and complexity in the diversity of identity formats. Identity becomes and has become a very integral part of security in ensuring to identify and know who it is that's coming into the environment and making those requests, whether it's a B2B system or a user or a mobile phone. It's essential to know who's making those calls in order to broker them and also facilitate that communication, and as we'll see later on, but also to intelligently cache that information for optimized API responses. Fundamentally, the role of the gateway in this topology is to present those APIs to those consumers in a way that securely enables that business transaction, those business flows. This is a fundamental aspect of what the Forum Sentry API Security Gateway does, is it provides the modern day cybersecurity protection and business enablement for those modern day formats like SOAP, XML, REST, JSON, HTML, and EBXML, and SOAP with attachments, and many other of those messaging standards we saw a few moments ago that effectively comprise a very substantial portion of the actual traffic flows in and out of the boundaries. Those traffic flows and those data formats pass through traditional architecture undetected and basically unencumbered, through firewall ports, through IDS sensors, through WAFs. That all is effectively oblivious to inspecting and analyzing and securing the traffic patterns on these formats. That's the purpose of the API Security Gateway, to provide for that. So that's our foundation of what that technology does and is doing in many environments worldwide today. But what we talk about in terms of edge caching, it's first important to know and understand how technology can be deployed at the edge in order to facilitate that caching. And the first and foremost primary aspect is that technology must be certified and industry hardened itself. As an edge deployment from a topology perspective, you must have technology that it is itself been certified secure, has been integrally developed and basically aligned with all those security standards and industry standards, such that the platform, architecture, code is all hardened and secure, such that it can provide the feature sets of edge security and edge caching with the confidence that doing so at the edge does not in any way jeopardize your business sensitive information, private information, keying information, data. So really the starting point, the foundation to provide edge caching and edge security comes from the essential necessity to have a hardened solution that can, from a network topology perspective, be deployed at the edge. And so from there, we look at really the fundamental core feature set, API security gateways. The Forum Sentry API security gateways fundamentally focused on 4 primary areas. Cybersecurity, threat detection, and prevention across all of those modern data formats that we noted a few moments ago, XML and SOAP and JSON and HTML and all those rich standards where the complexity of the data is actually within the data, within the flows themselves. SSO identity and access control, fundamental core feature set of the gateway that provides all those complex identity formats and single sign-on and session management and access control directly out of the box as policy management artifacts. Protocol and data conversion, fundamental core feature of the API security gateway. And then we look at, and we're going to target for this discussion, the API message response caching. The ability to intelligently cache information responses across these modern day rich data formats. So let's take a look at what that means. When we target the edge caching capabilities that Forum Sentry provides for, what we're doing is brokering that communication pattern, those business flows, in the same manner that the Forum Sentry API security gateway technology is meant to do and has done for many years, which is to inspect the inbound information flow for the characteristic information that resides within those data formats that it intercepts and brokers, such as SOAP, XML, REST, JSON, HTML, URL. Information, all about that comes in on the request channel. And those identity formats that are also coming in, such as SAML or OAuth or WS tokens or information like HTTP basic auth or digest auth. All those different auth schemes ultimately get you to a user, a credential that identifies uniquely the inbound user. And with all of those attributes in the request, such as information inside of the header or information that resides inside of the body, are all utilized for policy decision making in terms of enabling that flow from a security perspective, but more importantly as well is focusing on that information flow to provide then a means to correlate it with the response data that's coming back from that initial call. And that response data containing all of that richness is basically brokered for the communication back to the calling clients, but also preserved and stored on board localized cache where it can then remain hot for subsequent calls. It's served back to the client, but then intelligently preserved with those attributes in mind that first initially came in: user identities, request information, characteristics, and properties, such that it can make an intelligent decision when requests come in subsequently within some period of time, that it looks and inspects those similar characteristics and can provide then those responses from cache versus taking the hit to the infrastructure in terms of the I/O latency and the redundancy aspect of that information flow. Now, that is fundamentally different from maybe caching technologies that you may be familiar with that have been on the market for some time. There is a static nature to some of the things that are cached, such as images and CSS files or JavaScript or login pages, even app dialogues and things of that nature that are generally static in nature. However, may have dynamic components with regard to the user information, the devices themselves, maybe iPhones versus Androids. So there are still characteristics of the inbound requests that correlate to the responses that make these, traditionally static objects actually have some dynamic criteria. And again, Sentry's edge caching capability takes into account the richness of that inbound criteria to be much more intelligent about how it's caching information. Similarly, the dynamic nature of caching. Things like deterministic responses. Think about a conversion service where you have, let's, for example, say a temperature conversion. If I have 10 degrees Fahrenheit and I want to get a Celsius value, it doesn't matter who the caller is. The response and answer to that question is always going to be the same. And so for many types of services where the responses are deterministically known, those are very good candidates for intelligent caching, where we don't have to ask the infrastructure the same exact question to the same answer every single time it comes across. Same idea with lookup services. Authorization, very good example of user-specific caching of information that generally is dynamic but static for some duration of time. An authorization call for a particular user that's repeatedly performed will often have the same response for 10 minutes, a half hour, maybe for a whole day. Or even longer. But ultimately, a lot of redundancy in user-specific authorization calls that can be highly optimized through caching by way of, again, identifying and caching specific to user criteria and information on the request. Similarly, advisories, news feeds are all examples of dynamically changing data that has some static validity for some period of time, makes it very attractive and eligible for caching because it provides, again, that substantial performance improvement of serving from localized cache versus taking an infrastructure hit to make that call to the back-end system and broker that repeatedly back out to the client. So the edge caching capabilities of this Forum Sentry API Security Gateway are quite profound in what it can provide, and really the optimization is a profound new way of furthering the technology's capability to protect infrastructure APIs through cybersecurity protection, but also optimize those APIs with new, innovative, intelligent edge caching capabilities. We encourage you to learn more by visiting our website at www.forumsys.com.